held accountable, right? By the citizens of the United States. And in today's world, anyone who uses a bomb isn't just accountable to their domestic constituents. They're also going to be accountable to what? To the rest of the world, right? Because now we have this whole issue of all these different international organizations, and you could basically be indicted for war crimes if you just decided to use a weapon one day or kill a group of people just because you wanted to, right? Now, so the point is that when we're talking about the decision-making process, is that typically developed societies would argue that you have a process that pretty much is followed regardless of who becomes president, regardless of who becomes prime minister, right? It's not just you do this because your gut says you want to do it, okay? So there are all these checks and balances in place. When you are in a weak state, you don't have these checks and balances. Basically, you're making a decision based on the whims of whoever's in control of government at that point in time. Okay? So that's a concern that a lot of people have. Now, getting back to Iran. So, is Iran a weak state? Now we have that, what is a weak state? Iran pretty much, it's undergoing tremendous internal upheaval right now, and it's being barraged by all these different sanctions that the West is imposing on the country in order to try to push to affect the decisions that the Iranian government is making, especially vis-a-vis this whole nuclear issue. But the bottom line is they do have a process in place. Okay? So the question now becomes, would they likely decide to attack Israel and use nuclear weapons? And you have people that would argue they would, and you have people that would argue that they wouldn't. Because of this whole issue of what? That they would invite such a retaliatory strike that parts of Iran would be obliterated. Okay? And that's a big debate, all right? And that's important. But again, from a realist point of view, one would argue that they wouldn't do it because it's not in their interest. Okay? Because they'd be obliterated. On the other hand, the realists would also argue that would argue that it makes sense that Israel does not want Iran to have nuclear capability because it changes the balance of power structure in the region. And when someone has more power, that means it's a zero-sum game. If you have more power, that means you've taken power from someone else. So basically, more power for you means more power for someone else. And then from Israel's point of view, they have to do something. They have to. And that's what the big meeting right now that's taking place in the United States between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama. And that is just, the world is worried that Israel may do something. And if Israel does something, then who knows what's going to happen? Okay? All right? Now, but getting back to the lecture, guys, you have to pay attention. Everything's there for a reason. Now, regarding these issues of bounded rationality and unbounded rationality, when we talk about unbounded rationality, what we're saying here is there's no constraints, and that's unrealistic. Okay? And so the question is what are the constraints on decision making? And what the textbook does, it gives you a very macro kind of lens to use, which would be global conditions, internal conditions, and leadership issues, right? Okay, getting back, no one ever answered the question of where's the time element? How's the time element treated here? Where's the time element? Now, this is what's called a static model. Okay, what is a static model? You have conditions, you have decisions, and then you have the response. All right? So what you assume out of the analysis is the process that leads to the decision. You just focus on the decision, the conditions, the actual, and then you look at the actual decision, and then what do? You look at the consequences of the decision, right? So what you have here is you have two stages. You have stage one, the decision, the decision that is made in the with respect given the constraints. You have the actual implementation of the decision, and then the feedback. So where's the time here? Where's the time element here? Feedback. Come on. Time is right in feedback. But it's very static. Because you know what feedback is? Well, you guys got to bend your brains a little bit here, right? Bend them like Beckham. You guys remember the movie Bend Them Like Beckham? Who saw the movie Bend Them Like Beckham? Bend your brains. All right? You gotta, yeah. Folks, you gotta kind of let loose a little bit. Try to be creative. So the feedback loop really here is the time element, but it's a very static way of doing it because you have something happens. You have something happens at time t, right? And then you have the results in t plus 1, right? Okay? And then you have t plus 2, time 2. And there's always this feedback loop that affects each subsequent decision, right? But the problem here is that what we're ignoring is the process that kind of leads to, that goes from t to t plus 1, meaning, you know, a static problem ignores the constant flux that you're in as you're making the decisions because you're making a decision holding everything else constant. That's why when you have your game, I'm having you every 2 days, I'm doing what? Making it harder. Making it harder. 10 events. Become 20 events. Become 30 events. I stop at 30 events. Okay? Because the whole point is I'm forcing you to do what? When you're dealing with 30 events, can you deal with all 30 events at the same time? No. So what do you have to do? Well, you have limited time. You got to make a decision, right? Okay, well, but about what? You got what's the choice here?
Choose the most important part.
Exactly. You got to choose what's most important to you. So ultimately, when I look at your decisions, I look at what you chose to focus on, okay, first. Because the understanding here is you can't complete everything. So you have to make decisions. It's the calculus of choice. All right? So I'm emphasizing choice here. And you're basically choosing what is most important to you. And that's really what people do every day. Because you cannot deal, I mean, think of the world we're living in, all the information you're getting bombarded with. You know, the amount of information that is presented in the Sunday edition of the New York Times, okay, is more information in that paper than a person in the Middle Ages would have had access to over the course of the year. Look at how far we've come. All right. So my point is that can you read? You know, who's ever seen the Sunday edition of the New York Times? You ever read the whole thing? Okay. So what do? You pick and choose. We don't say you of course, we all look at the pictures, right? Okay. But the point is you pick and choose what you look at, right? Well, most important to you. So that's what you do when you make decisions, particularly in. I mean, if there's a war going on in the Bahamas, do you think Kuwait is really paying attention to that? No. But if something's happening in Bahrain, obviously, you know, the Kuwaiti government is watching very carefully. Okay? So this is what I'm looking at. This is what and I can't really teach that to you, right? I can tell you, you can listen to it, and then as we did with the last chapter, you forget about it, because everything I said on Monday seemed to have been forgotten. But maybe you just had a rough night last night, right? Okay. So let's go back to. So we stopped off at bounded rationality. What I basically did is that we talked about the pluralist model, and that is you have the pluralist model. What they're trying to do is this with this bounded rationality. With this is that if you take a look at decision making, all right, and then you have the individual, right? That's the individual. Okay. Now, the individuals, we had two variations. We had the unbounded model, which we said was unrealistic. It's not in the book. This is Professor Kuczynski speak for it. Okay? And then we had the bounded rationality model. right? So if we go back real quickly, this would be the individual, right? And this is, you have unbounded, U, and then you have B, bounded, right? And this, you have perfect information, time is not relevant, you know everything, because you have perfect information, the problem is well defined, and what do we say about that model? It's unrealistic, right? Typically, because of all these factors, these impediments that we talked about, typically the actor can make a mistake, right? Why can he make a mistake? Because he has access, because he's living in a world of imperfect information, time is limited, okay? He's got to evaluate the problem, and he may get it wrong, okay? Or he may misunderstand, he may misread the problem, right? He may you say wrong, because that assumes that there's a right problem, right? He may misread the problem, so he does the best he can, right? And he always assumes that he may not get it, he may, miss some important factors which could create problems. So he kind of lowers his expectations, right? Are you with me so far? Now, but what do we know about individuals? Is decision making all about just one person, or is it about more than one person?
More than one.
Okay, so what we do is what we have in this example is that the author now introduces the pluralist model, and that is individuals live in or they work in an organization. Okay, so now we have an organization. Okay, everybody with me so far? So now we have an organization. So now we have, in the organizations, we have different departments. We have the science department, we have the humanities department, we have the social science department, we have the business, although now business has become its own school. Okay, do you see what's going on? And you're a member of that group, which means now you have different groups within the organization doing what? Competing with each other. Everybody with me so far? Yeah. Okay, so what we have now, we have different rooms. We have different rooms in terms of, you have different rooms in the organizations. We have different interpretations of the problem. Okay, people have control over information. I have better information than you do, and I don't want to give it up, right? But we assume that whatever group you're part of, you have loyalty to your group. So in other words, if you're a social science professor in social sciences, you are more loyal to the people in social sciences than they are, let's say, to the humanities division. Okay? Now, so typically so in this kind of situation, what's the best approach? You bargain. All right? You bargain. You basically you still make decisions are still based on incrementalism, meaning because you have issues with, time is power, you still don't have, you have imperfect information, so you don't want to do anything too harshly because you have to keep in mind that you may be misunderstanding something, right? So your decisions aren't very transformative, they're incremental. You with me so far? Okay? So what we have now is we have this kind of pluralist model. But typically what's happening, we have different groups competing with each other. Got it? Okay? So the final one is the bounded rationality model, is what we have here is we have the nation, and actually in this particular, the way I've just discussed the pluralist model, you could actually have something, the nation state, okay, and this actually could kind of apply to each one or the other, whether you're talking about foreign policy or foreign policy, because if you're talking about here, let's say you have a policy community. Foreign policy is formulated by different branches, different institutions in the government, right? Within the government itself. But at the end of the day, you make a decision that's in the interest of the government. So this would be basically organizations or nation states. Now when we talk about regions versus the globe, all right? So when we're talking about in this class, is we're talking about which part? The nation state level, foreign policy. Everybody with me so far? Yeah. And we assume that this stuff here, the individual and the organization, at the end of the day, after the competition, what's going to happen? they're gonna do what's best for the nation state.